Imagine being only 6 years old. You go to school, play games with your friends, do your math and social studies, maybe some homework. You have a loving family and a normal childhood. You eat dinner every night with your parents. Maybe you go out to see a movie with them or stay the night at a friend's house. But on a normal day, like any other, while you're deep asleep, something happens to you. Next thing you know, you wake up expecting to be in your room, but you're not. You're in an alien environment. You're led by strangers along with other kids you don't know to a large room where you sit down confused and scared. You're told that you're to be a soldier, a protector of Earth and all her colonies, that you cannot go back to your parents. Ever. With this knowledge shoved into your confused, childish mind, you sleep, perhaps hoping this was all some strange dream. But instead, you wake up in pain, gasping for air as a stun baton is stabbed into your gut. You're made to exercise until you puke and to compete with other children in ways you could have never imagined. And if you're not up to par, you don't even get to eat dinner. This, whether you like it or not, is your life now. It is your life forever. This was the reality of the Spartan 2 candidates. They would be brainwashed, trained, broken down, and built back up to serve the military for the rest of their lives, unquestioningly. And even after 8 years of this, when it came time for their bodies to be cut open and operated on to make them the most physically capable humans to ever live, many of them either died or were left crippled by the augmentations. Many so crippled that they were put in cryogenic sleep until they could, hopefully, be restored to health in the future. This is the origin of the great heroes of mankind in Halo, the Spartans. And like many other aspects of this universe, it shows that the universe of Halo is not a kind one. Behind all of the amazing music, set pieces, and kick-assery of the Master Chief lays a sprawling, grimdark, dystopian hellscape. The Halo universe is one that, despite the many changes in the last over a decade, is supposed to be a military sci-fi setting approaching grimdark levels of existential horrors in many ways. Like these Spartans, these heroes of man, except these heroes of man were not made to combat the great enemy of mankind in the Covenant. They were made to fight humans in the various insurrectionist movements and organizations across the outer colonies. One can only imagine what would have happened if the Covenant had not showed up. Let us first and foremost explore the other horrors of living on these worlds and the horrors in this universe even before the Covenant showed up. Before the war for humanity's very survival began with the Covenant, the Insurrection had been an ever-escalating and sprawling series of civil conflicts across human space, primarily fought with numerous nationalist and separatist movements on many of the outer colony worlds. By the last quarter of the 25th century, many of the outer colonies were tired of being ruled by the unified Earth government and wanted independence. Most of the resources of certain worlds undoubtedly being extracted and transported back to the inner colonies. Worlds like Reach and Tribute and many others, and especially the colossal, sprawling military-industrial complex of the UNSC, relied heavily on resources from these worlds. As established in the Fall of Reach book, Reach was sought after and colonized so heavily because of its resources and proximity to Earth through slipspace. But by the period of the games, and likely the late 2400s, many of the mountains on Reach renowned for their resources were essentially hollowed out and had already been used up. And so we arrive at the situation before the conflict really began. Many of these intercolony worlds and Earth were becoming nervous at the growing discontent and rhetoric among outer colony worlds, due to their dependence on them in many ways, but also due to the likelihood of armed conflict. In 2491, the so-called Carver findings, an algorithm created by Dr. Elias Carver, theorized that within just a few decades, human society and social order in the outer colonies would completely break down. He recommended swift and brutal action by the military, and the UNSC adopted these findings as essentially their standard model of how they would conduct themselves in the years to come towards the outer colonies. One must ask, however, why would people want to secede from this vast, successful human empire? Well, aside from the lower living standards of the outer colonies and the general human tendency to not want to be told what to do by a government, especially one literal light years away to whom you are just a cog in the machine, let's just take a look at some of the things the UEG and the UNSC has done. For one, you have the grid. Essentially, most cities, especially on Earth, track absolutely everything you do. In order to, say, make purchases, drive a vehicle, own anything, and basically interact with society at all like a full citizen, you are tracked in absolutely everything you do. And no, you don't have a say in this. The government has cameras everywhere, and I do mean everywhere, and can analyze even the faces you make and begin recording you at any time as they please. If your conversation, for instance, is isolated or your body language isn't how they like it, they can listen in on you at any time. And, of course, they can separate you from this grid and surveillance as they please, effectively making you a second-class citizen who cannot access the same tier of living as everyone else does. Cars won't operate for you, cashiers won't take your money, and the automatic doors at grocery stores won't even open for you. And if that sounds too much to monitor for individual human persons, you'd be correct, because much of it is monitored by artificial intelligences, like, for instance, the superintendent AI that runs all of New Mombasa. Most AI are so-called dumb AI, which are programmed to be able to do specific tasks ridiculously well and faster than any human ever could, like, for instance, monitor the public. And the smart AI, like Cortana, aren't much better. They are created by taking a human brain and essentially copying it into a digital matrix, destroying the brain in the process, creating this mockery and clone of once living humans to serve a more dynamic purpose at the hands of, for the most part, the state and the military. That all doesn't sound too pleasant, does it? Now imagine the same government who does that wants to continue to issue edicts over your homeworld, the world you and your ancestors have lived on and run for generations, all while continuing to extract the majority of your resources for the continuing buildup of the military and the inner colonies. And, as you continue to get more discontent with the status quo, the elites in the inner colonies and Earth continue to steadily replace the Colonial Administration Authority, the extension of their government over civilians, with just the UNSC military. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Well, this, of course, with the algorithm of Elias Carver, was a big part of the insurrection starting. Many say they don't know who fired the first shot, but I for one think it's pretty clear who escalated the conflict beyond what everybody expected at the time. Just a year after the Carver findings were published, an outer colony world by the name of Far Isle had decided they wanted to exercise their right as a world, as a people, to self-determination, and rose up in rebellion over the civilian government. Despite the best efforts of the UNSC and the Colonial Administration Authority to contain the rebellion, the world effectively was completely in rebellion and they had failed to stop this revolution. The response? Was it a larger military presence, a large-scale invasion, maybe a blockade, perhaps? Nope. The Office of Naval Intelligence, in typical government bureaucrat three-letter agency fashion, decided the best course of action was to annihilate everything. They deployed numerous nuclear weapons and destroyed the entire world, ruthlessly slaughtering everyone alive on the planet, just for daring to leave the Empire and choose their own path. This remained, even until after the Human Covenant War, a major justification for the conflicts that would follow. And for many, it showed that they could never, under any circumstances, trust the unified Earth government. After this, the Callisto Incident would take place 2 years later. With the horrific outrage of Far Isle and the political backdrop of this, a group of insurrectionists captured a UNSC military vessel, the Callisto, and, I can't say the word, but disposed of the entire crew aboard. So, as we'll get to, they're not exactly the good guys either. But in response, the UNSC sent a strike group of 3 vessels. The 3 vessels fired upon the Callisto, which hit among asteroids and promptly detonated a nuclear device, launching all the debris at the UNSC vessels. One vessel was destroyed immediately, and the other two were damaged heavily. A young Preston J. Cole, the most senior surviving officer aboard the ship Las Vegas, took control of the ship and declared need for medical attention and activated the distress signal, essentially surrendering. When the Callisto docked, however, Preston Cole detonated the last remaining Ares missiles aboard, critically damaging the Callisto. He proceeded to bluff by opening the empty missile silos aboard the Las Vegas and was able to get the insurrectionists to surrender. Although this incident resulted in the insurrectionists losing, they managed to capture a UNSC military vessel, get rid of the entire crew, and use the vessel to destroy an entire UNSC ship and critically damage 2 others. With this kind of brazen action against the UNSC militarily, the insurrection spread to other worlds in short time. Like the small collapse beginning the avalanche, the Carver findings began to become true. That same year, the Eridanos system broke out in a similar rebellion, which was crushed 2 years later at the cost of 4 destroyers. But the rebels operated in that same system for decades longer. These events would happen over and over again, rebellions continuing to crop up on world after world, with absolutely brutal reprisals inciting even more infamous reactions from the insurrectionists. All this because the UEG did not agree with letting worlds have self-determination, because that would result in the human race no longer being ruled by a single, monolithic, sprawling police state, but also that it would necessarily split mankind into various competing nation-states like centuries before on Earth. This, to them, was unacceptable. The same Preston Cole who would later become a war hero for mankind in the Human Covenant War, the same young man who won the UNSC the Callisto Incident despite violating laws of conduct in war by faking distress and surrender, was also the same man who predicted this course of events while he was still in his freshman year of high school. The Viability of Extended Colonization, an essay by Preston Cole, came to the same conclusion Dr. Carver would after him. That being, that due to the fact that humanity as a species is intelligent and the ecosystems of these worlds are further and further from Earth, it will eventually produce a people with a unique enough identity so as to make them want to leave allegiance to Earth behind. He likened it to the British Empire and how America, one of its colonies, eventually became the dominant hegemon and far eclipsed Britain after a certain period in history. He believed in the quote, "The center cannot hold." So effectively, with an algorithm and beliefs such as this being widespread, and with an ever-escalating civil war on their hands, the UEG's prediction of social order breaking down became even bleaker by the early 26th century. They believed an endless series of brutal civil wars was inevitable, and this is what led to the concept and eventual creation of the Spartan II, or Orion II, program. A program that kidnapped children and molded them into perfect machines of war, and made them into transhumanist abomination techno-death squads for the express purpose of fighting the rebels who wished only to split from the UEG. But of course, if you think the insurrection was nothing but the story of brave freedom fighters, you'd be dead wrong. Despite the horrors of Far Isle and the creation of the Spartan II program, the insurrection wasn't without blood on its hands. Far from it. Certain movements had done actions such as, self-delete bombings, truck bombings, bombing nightclubs and places frequented by government officials and military officials, and all the way up to hijacking and, yes, blowing up civilian freighters, resulting in the deaths of thousands, and even at one point a group nuking an entire arcology, resulting in the unaliving of 2 million people and injuring 8 million more. These same groups, many of them literal neo-communist and neo-fascist in nature, among assumedly many other ideologies new and old, did not comprise one single mass of people, one movement, but the many different peoples and groups across dozens of worlds. It was the Spartan II program, modeled after the original Orion program, which aimed to serve the same purpose decades prior. That was, to be the scalpel, so to speak, a way to help significantly reduce the amount of resources and lives having to be committed to large-scale war with these independence groups. So, what does this mean? The UEG forcing people to stay because they dared to leave is correct? I mean, it seems that the Carver findings were correct, at least. For instance, if a world that produces something vital like food or has a certain material utilized for starships or slipspace drives and it achieves independence, then it can now choose when and when not to give to other worlds its vital resources. If this is the case, and it goes unchallenged and spreads to many other worlds, then human interstellar civilization would surely break down. I believe it comes down to this. The UEG represents the idea of human unity, but it is only able to maintain this idea of perfect unity with an increasingly authoritarian, militaristically imposed, sprawling bureaucracy. One has to ask if they truly have humanity's best interests at heart, or if they're simply trying to stop the inevitable outworking of human nature for their own ends. Meanwhile, groups like the United Rebel Front, or URF, represent the idea of human autonomy. Groups and individuals and worlds choosing how best it is for them in their unique environments to live and move forward, establishing their own governments instead of the policy dished out from Earth. But these same groups often commit horrific actions in the name of freedom, only serving to make the conflict worse. So one also must necessarily ask if they have the best interests of humanity at heart, or are simply trying to eke out the most gain they can get from a dying system and using any means necessary to try to break the will of their enemies. Both sides here don't care for the toll of human lives that must be paid to achieve their ends. Speaking for myself here, I'm an Orthodox Christian. I believe that all groups have the right to self-determination and the right to exist. If anything, the UEG should be happy that this relatively peaceful human golden age has lasted for as long as it has. This sprawling monoculture and government is not just ahistorical, it's fundamentally flawed, and it lasting forever is simply contrary to human nature. It's not going to happen. Inevitably, people on other worlds light years away will form their own identities, languages, cultures, and probably even genetically distinct races due to the environment and different gene pools, should one extend the timeline far enough. But I also believe, as an Orthodox Christian, that while we ought to have our sovereignty, we cannot just simply pretend our fellow man doesn't exist and not care for their well-being. Nor can we just simply erase the lives of millions and still claim to be the righteous side in a conflict. So these are your options. The best places in the Halo universe you can live? Is it some undeveloped backwater where you lack the same access to necessities and advanced technology as the inner colonies and are literally ruled by terror groups just because it has less government oversight? Or is it the less violent, more stable world where every little thing you do is monitored to make sure it's in tandem with the state? Where you effectively have a social credit score that is continually updated by state-loyal artificial intelligences? Ultimately, I can't say one way or the other, but what I can say is that it is far, far from utopia. Now, I've talked at length of the ideological wars and problems of living in this universe, and I think you get the point. Halo is grim. I mean, between the police state and radical rebel groups. But, of course, all of this self-determination and unique peoples coming about, or human unity and the Golden Age being restored, would be great. If it weren't for the colossal elephant in the room that you're all likely thinking of. Now that we've shown that Halo was always dark, even before the Covenant, let's finally address the heart of Halo, and what makes it a truly bleak story. Among the political landscape of man, among our debates and wars and developing history of the rise and fall of empires and the birth of new ones, appeared something completely unexpected. In the year 2525, after a series of events culminating in a botched first contact and the revelation to a select few of the hierarchs of the Covenant hegemony about the nature of their gods and humanity, they would initiate the Human Covenant War, or what the Covenant called the War of Annihilation. The Covenant declared to mankind, who were unaware for the reasons why, that your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instruments. From this declaration of war onward, every human they came across would be eradicated. Ships, fleeing civilians, any world that didn't have a treasure trove of ancient artifacts of their so-called gods, and anywhere else that humans dwelt. Given that the Covenant were fighting a war of extermination, they didn't always need to commit ground forces to a planet in order to get rid of the humans living there. All they needed to do was destroy the orbital defenses and any human fleet or fleets defending the planet, and do what they do best: glass it. The same planet First Contact had properly taken place at, Harvest, was the same world which was subsequently glassed quite heavily after a large-scale evacuation. Preston Cole, the one mentioned earlier, retook the world the year after the war began. He had been given command of the single largest fleet ever assembled by humanity up to that point, and despite this, he still only won because his forces outnumbered the Covenant so heavily, and yet he lost a third of the fleet's strength to one single Covenant ship. This led to a 5-year-long and brutal battle for the UNSC to keep the planet under their control. By 2531, after just 6 years of warfare, some regions of UNSC space had already depleted their entire nuclear stockpile, or at least to near nothing, just to combat the Covenant. The same disenfranchised backwater worlds rich in resources that had wanted independence, that were so heavily relied on, were ruthlessly hunted down one by the Covenant. And on every world, the same thing would happen, over and over and over again. The Covenant would just one day drop out of the sky, destroy the forces, if much of any, defending the world these people have likely lived on their entire life, and proceed to, within a matter of hours, reduce them and everyone they love and know to nothing. The planet's atmosphere would likely mostly be burned away, the oceans and lakes and rivers would be reduced to ash-choked pools of water, and the surface of the continents would be reduced to a smoldering glass-like silica due to the plasma bombardment planet-wide. The war kept on with this pattern for several more years. By 2534, many of humanity's agricultural worlds had already been destroyed by the Covenant, and food riots were common on certain planets due to famine. And by the next year, most of the outer colonies, hundreds of worlds with billions of people across them, had been either exterminated and destroyed or had cut communications with the UNSC. Due to the Covenants getting closer and closer to the inner colonies after a decade of war, the Cole Protocol was instituted across all of human space. What was previously a brilliant but brutal way to slow down the Covenant with asset and information denial created by Admiral Preston J. Cole for his own fleet was adopted for the entire UNSC military. The main aim of this was to prevent any ship from ever being a source of information for the Covenant to lead to other worlds, or, at the absolute worst, Earth. If a ship is boarded and about to be captured, it was bound by protocol to self-destruct. Furthermore, all movement through human space was restricted to military vessels alone, to try and prevent the Covenant from tracking down more colonies and eradicating more of humanity. But the insurrectionists, seeing this as a great and grievous attack on their freedom, began also attacking the UNSC in response, not understanding the dire straits humanity was in at the time. In fact, many insurrectionists continued attacking the UNSC while the war was raging on, and some refused to believe the Covenant was truly exterminating humanity for years into the war. In the 2530s, in response to the war and the success of the Spartan II program in combating the Covenant, despite their original purpose, the Spartan III program was created. And even more than just seeking out the most genetically superior children of the human race, it loosened its parameters and recruited war orphans who wanted revenge on the Covenant. Some were as young as only 4 years old when they were recruited for war. Their first assignment involving jumping out of an aircraft and parachuting. Just think of the Spartan IIs and their circumstance. Now imagine you're that same age, 6 years old, but instead of being taken in the night, your entire family, society, way of life, and entire homeworld have been taken from you. And more than anything, you simply want to fight back and do something about it. Grasping at the chance, you take the word of these mysterious figures and begin extremely intensive training for years, and are augmented sooner than the Spartan IIs, albeit with safer augmentations. But the sum of your existence, and for most of your fellow brothers and sisters of your company, is a battle that, while dealing a heavy blow to Covenant manufacturing, results in the loss of nearly every single person who went on this mission, most likely including yourself. This was the reality of the Spartan IIIs. Cheaper and mass-produced compared to the Spartan IIs with cheaper armor than Mjolnir, they were great and dedicated soldiers, but most of them were sent to you-know-what on missions they would never be coming back from. And despite their Pyrrhic victory in missions such as Operation Prometheus, all it did was delay the Covenant. Same with later similar battles in the year of 2537. By 2540, with the loss of New Constantinople and later more inner colonies throughout the 2540s, the odds of victory became ever slimmer. At this point, the Office of Naval Intelligence predicted humanity probably wouldn't last past the decade, or at the latest, humanity would probably perish sometime in the 2550s. There were still, of course, the occasional victories by the UNSC, with great losses as usual. One being Admiral Cole's last stand, where he may or may not have survived, and he destroyed 2 fleets worth of Covenant vessels by insanely igniting a super gas giant into exploding with nuclear weapons. So this deep into the war, let's take a little refresher here. No matter where you could live in this universe as a human, at this point, it's looking like nowhere is safe. That after 15 to 20 years of war, it's only ever a matter of time until huge bulbous alien ships drop out of the sky and rain literal hell upon your world. Even if you're lucky to escape, the looming dread that eventually there will be nowhere to go must be reigning supreme in your mind. Whether an outer colony militant or an inner colony loyalist, the Covenant does not care. Man, woman, child, elderly, sick, it doesn't matter to them. They don't show mercy, they don't care. They laugh in alien tongues as they reduce entire worlds to glass and billions to ash. This was the waking nightmare of humanity for almost 3 decades during this war. Despite the fact that the Covenant had only ever been slowed by humanity, unbeknownst to them, the Covenant was slowly starting to fracture. By 2550, after 25 years of constant warfare, the Sangheili, or elites, who previously had carried out the Prophet's War of Annihilation without question, began to be impressed en masse. A growing consensus was forming within the warrior race and their honor culture, that a race like humanity, so tenacious and dedicated to fighting in the face of certain death and defeat, had more than earned its place in the Covenant. So the Jiralhane, or brutes, were being elevated above the Sangheili step by step due to their obedience to the Prophet's orders. And so, as the war began to accelerate and the extermination of mankind was nearing completion day by day, the Covenant itself was unknowingly hurtling towards a great collapse. By the middle of 2552, the Office of Naval Intelligence had resigned itself to the fact that humanity likely only had months left before the Covenant finished off the inner colonies and found Earth. They had even hatched an absolutely insane Hail Mary operation for the remaining Spartan IIs to capture a Covenant vessel, make it to the Covenant homeworld, and capture a Prophet to negotiate for peace. They were that desperate. But unfortunately, Oni's predictions came true. Reach, the planet so heavily colonized and the beating heart of the UNSC military, was finally found by the Covenant and besieged. Despite tenacious fighting and daring efforts by the Marines, the Army, the Navy, and the actions of Spartans such as Noble Team, the UNSC would ultimately experience its greatest defeat in the war. With Reach destroyed and reduced to glass, along with another major world of Tribute, which lost over half of its population, most of its industry, humanity was really only left with Earth. The economic and military losses of Tribute and Reach looked like it spelled the beginning of the end for humanity. This, of course, with the fleeing of the Pillar of Autumn to the Halo Ring of Installation 04, is what leads to the events of the games, which I won't retread too much here because wow, this video is long, and I just realized that I love Halo way too much to be succinct about it. But while humanity won a great victory at Installation 04, the events of which led directly to the fracturing of the Covenant in the Great Schism, we have, of course, the Covenant and human forces on the ring uncovering the single greatest horror of the Halo universe: the Flood. The ancient Lovecraftian enemy that brought the Forerunners, the advanced race whose relics and ruins are left scattered across the galaxy, to their very knees. The parasite that spread so far and wide and was so near unstoppable that the Forerunners had to construct the Halo Rings, not being able to, with all of their might, destroy the Flood, only being able to design weapons powerful enough to destroy any potential hosts of this truly Lovecraftian plague. And the best part of these weapons of galactic destruction? The Covenant's entire purpose from its inception was to find these ring worlds and to activate them. The entire linchpin of the genocidal alien alliance of species was the belief that these ancient weapons would allow them to ascend to godhood, as they believed their gods did. In reality, their gods kinda went extinct, a little bit, And if you're not an idiot and you try to dispute the original lore of the Bungie games, the Forerunners were actually humans, adding an entire massive layer of tragic and dark irony to the Human Covenant War. But all of their ambition and success as an empire crumbled to dust in the final months of 2552. The elites and brutes finally igniting into interstellar war after the prophets basically orchestrated a false flag on the prophet of regret to blame on the elites to justify their replacement. The role they'd had for thousands of years was stripped from them, and of course, the purpose of the Halos also revealed to many elites. Amidst the chaos, the ancient enemy and parasite unveiled on Installation 04 and which infested Installation 05 took the Covenant capital and infected billions, and was barely stopped come the events of Halo 3. But still, a portion of this reached Earth, and a massive region of the continent of Africa was glassed by the elites just to stop it. If the famous quote of the shipmaster Urtas Vadum can be believed,
"One single flood spore can destroy a species."
So in Halo, the brutal civil wars leading into a war of genocide by aliens, and then multiple close calls of total galactic extermination with the Halos not once, but 3 times in the original game's narratives, and on top of all that, the return and extremely close defeat of the Flood once more, makes one insanely bleak and chaotic setting. You are left after the war with a universe filled by the warring remnants of the collapsed colossal Covenant Empire, the Arbiters faction, and pretty much just Earth. I mean, there are a relative handful of worlds left compared to the beginning of the war. Humanity lost probably anywhere from 19 to 23 billion people in the war. With their military in tatters, the few worlds left, many of whom will not rejoin allegiance with Earth, their population so few, humanity is left in a truly tragic state, but somehow, miraculously, still surviving after the war. Now, right here I'd like to say I won't bother covering the post-war 343 lore as A, I did that years ago as my very first video, and B, because while there's still a sizable amount of it that's good and I do enjoy it admittedly, most of it is anywhere from mid to painfully bad in my honest opinion. But anyways, the question remains, do you also think Halo is an incredibly grimdark dystopian setting as I do? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe and do all the things YouTubers normally ask you to do if you love this video or my content as a whole. I truly thank all of you for your patience with my uploads, as always. It honestly feels really nice to return to making a Halo video after years and try to do it justice as my personal favorite series and sci-fi setting of all time. I mean, I did even name my channel after one of my favorite characters, and my channel logo is the Didact's helmet. So, if you enjoyed this, please do share it around. And, as always, until next time, God be with you.